Let's talk about some burning questions. We're going to go to the NFC South first, down to the state of Louisiana, New Orleans in particular. And they've had a lot going on the last few weeks. We heard, so you and I were at the Colorado Showcase a month ago or so now. Days after that, we found out that Derek Carr's shoulder injury could keep him out for the course of the season. And then we found out over the weekend that Derek Carr is done forever. He is retired from football because of that shoulder injury, played 11 years. One of the most amazing facts that I read this morning, only 15 people in the history of organized football have made more in the NFL than Derek Carr. That's how much money this man has made. Shout out to Derek Carr, who at 34 is going to have a nice little basket of retirement there. But now the issue for the Saints is this. They drafted Jake Haener 2 years ago. They drafted Spencer Rattler last year. They drafted Tyler Shuck, 40th overall, a few weeks ago. That's their primary question. But I'm going to get to your burning question before we follow it with mine. Did the abrupt retirement of Derek Carr catch them off guard? Because they draft quarterbacks every year. That said, I don't know if Tyler Shuck was penciled to be the day one starter when they drafted him.
No, and I think there was a level of they knew it could possibly happen, but weren't quite sure. And we've talked about it on this podcast several times about how the Saints always draft a year ahead of a need, but I'm pretty sure they didn't think it was going to be this much of a need this soon. So I'm not quite sure where they were in terms of knowing whether Derek was going to play or not. I think there were some rumors going around when he first announced the shoulder injury that there was a chance that he would not play for the Saints in terms of just being on the field, but he would still be under contract with the Saints. And then as we saw this weekend, he's no longer under contract with the Saints because he retired.
So Kellen Moore is the new head coach there, obviously offensive-minded. OC came over from Philadelphia and Dallas before that. So here's the question. I don't know if it would have changed their opinion had they known 100% whether Derek Carr was retiring or not in terms of taking Tyler Shuck 40th overall, the third quarterback off the board. But Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler went 0-7 last year in the starts they had to make once Derek Carr got hurt. And now it's Tyler Shuck. I would imagine, Rand, if you're the GM talking with the head coach and the offensive staff, it's a wide open competition. But at the end of the day, this feels like a pretty tough spot to be in if you're trying to compete in that division.
Absolutely. Not only if you're trying to compete in the division, but you're trying to compete with a first-time head coach, not just a new head coach, but a first-time head coach, an offensive-minded head coach. So I think that changes things. And I think if they had more of an inkling, right, I think they were pretty set with where they were taken in the top 10. But I think you would have saw them make more of an effort to probably trade up ahead of the Giants to take Jackson Dart, because there was some love there between the organization and Jackson Dart with how they showed up at his pro day. So I think if they had more of an inkling headed into it, they probably would have swung a little bit bigger to get a guy like Jackson Dart in the first round.
So one of the teams we talked about last week during the AFC part of this conversation with the Cleveland Browns, they have 5 quarterbacks on the roster. I read a headline yesterday. I didn't read the article, just perusing as I was doing yard work, and it turns out you were sitting on your deck drinking lemonade, but that's a different conversation. Would the Saints want to call Andrew Berry and the Browns about one of their 4 quarterbacks? Deshaun Watson's not going to play. One of their 4 quarterbacks. Would that be something that might be a consideration?
For me, I'd say no, just because of the simple fact, and let's be honest here, like the Browns have one quarterback that we know is not going to play in Deshaun Watson. Then you have 2 rookie quarterbacks. And let's be honest, will Kenny Pickett or Flacco move the needle for New Orleans that much, right? So let's see, and I'm saying we as the Saints, let's see what we have in these 3 young quarterbacks, and that'll give us a more clear picture of what our future looks like.
Yep. I think we're different minds about this, but you can tell me for certain. I like Spencer Rattler a lot. That's no surprise to anyone that follows this podcast. I think I probably would have had him rated higher than Tyler Shuck had they come out in the same class. Now, Spencer Rattler's 5'11", 6 feet, ran a 4.9 or whatever, so he's not the athlete that Tyler Shuck is. He does have a big arm. He's played a lot of football. There is the maturity stuff early on in his career. Does one of those players move the needle more than the other in terms of, obviously, at 6'5", Tyler Shuck looks the part, but in terms of a player you feel more comfortable with, because they're probably the same age?
Well, here's the beauty for Kellen Moore. He's never had any of them. right? So the other two, and Jake Hayner and Spencer Rattler, that's more of, Mickey Loomis and Jeff Ireland, those guys having more of a feel for him. And one thing we know about Tyler Shuck, that this is a Kellen Moore pick, because this is a guy that's coming in under his regime. So I would be more inclined to, let's see where Tyler Shuck is. Now, he's a rookie, yes, but like we've talked about numerous times on this show, that he's 25, 26, 27 years old. So he's a little bit older and should be better equipped to handle some of this initial pressure.
Tyler Shuck's so old, we don't actually know how old he is. That's how old Tyler Shuck is. One other thing, this was my burning question, because I wanted to get away from the Derek Carr stuff because I knew we would talk about that. But one of their first pick was Kelvin Banks Jr., 9th overall, the left tackle out of Texas. And unofficially, he's penciled in as a starter at left tackle. That allows Tully Fuaga, last year's first-round pick, to go back to the right side. This offensive line is actually in pretty good shape on paper at the very least. That's great news for whoever the quarterback ends up being. But I wanted to ask you about Kelvin Banks Jr., and you saw this last year with J.C. Latham. You got to be careful about putting too much expectations on a rookie starting offensive lineman, I would imagine, especially one playing left tackle. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the conversations I had with JC very early on, letting him know you're extremely talented. Everyone knows that. But now you're going against grown men who have mortgages to pay. They got private school to pay for. They're married. They got kids. They're not going to allow themselves to get pumped by a 21-year-old kid. Right. And so now it comes into, you have to study opponents. You're going to have to know, because this game now is about technique. Everybody's an athlete just about at this level. So now it becomes about technique and fundamentals. And that's what these young tackles have to get used to.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that the Saints now have the biggest looming question at quarterback, because the next team we're going to talk about in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Carolina Panthers. 12 months ago, we didn't know what Bryce Young's future was going to look like because new coach Dave Canales was just coming in. 2 weeks into the season, he got benched. And then we figured, well, he will never play in Carolina again. And the next thing you know, Andy Dalton gets in a fender bender, and Bryce Young comes out like he's been taken back to Alabama the way he was slinging it. So your burning question for the Carolina Panthers now going into year 3 with Bryce, year 2 with Dave Canales. How much growth do we expect to see from Bryce in year 3 and year 2 with Canales? And I'll just say this. Canales was effective in Seattle. He was extremely effective in Tampa Bay. And it was a little rocky early on there at Carolina for, I'm sure, numerous reasons. But it feels like he and Bryce are now on the same page, and they've added, of course, Ted McMillan, their first-round pick, to help Bryce out.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a good year for Bryce, just from the standpoint of now he can eliminate some of the thinking, right? So last year, it's a new system. It's your second year in the league, your second offensive system that you're trying to learn. And now you spent another year in the system. You know the nuances of the offense and what it's expected of you. So now you can instinctually go out and play, and you don't have to think your way through it. So I expect him to have a big jump. And like you said, to take Teteroa McMillan and give him another weapon, to go with Xavier Legette and the guys that they've added in his backfield. I expect him to make a big jump offensively.
Hey, we always talk about last year's quarterback class compared to this year's quarterback class. You and I, with different organizations at the time, made the quarterback pro day circuit for Bryce and CJ and Will Levis and Anthony Richardson 2 years ago. If Bryce Young were in this quarterback class, and you have to erase the last 2 years just going on his Alabama tape, where would he have ranked for you?
He would still be number one. And I think
okay.
a lot of it has to do with just the team, and look how he uplifted that team at Bama. So I think he would still be number one. I think it would be more of a question just because of Cam's physical skill set and Shador's ability to process and throw the ball accurately. But I still think in the end, you look at the totality of the talent that was around him and what he was able to do, I think Bryce would still be number one.
I appreciate your honesty, because our buddy Pete Prisco has been anti-Bryce since day one. He's also anti-Russell, and I always come back to this theory. Since Pete is, pushing 5'2", he's always down on the guys that he's closest to in height for some reason. He needs to have some solidarity with those young men. But here's my follow-up question, and this is my burning question in particular. Can Bryce be consistent enough to make the Panthers hover around 500, maybe even get a little north of 500 by the time it's all said and done?
I'll go out on a limb and say yes. And I'm going to tap into my inner Ryan Wilson and love up everybody right now, because everybody's 0-0, nobody's lost a game. But again, another year in the system and the weapons that they're adding around him, they have shown a commitment to make this pick right. and to give him everything he needs to be successful. So as long as those guys are able to step up around him, they're able to protect him, I think he gives you a good chance to be around 500.
Yeah, and they made a lot of moves in the draft and free agency to bolster that defense when needed to happen. We talked about Ted McMillan. Last year, they got Xavier Legette. They got Jimmy Horn as well, the Colorado wide receiver to add to Bryce's arsenal as well. So the opportunity is there, no doubt about it. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hit the rest of the NFC South, and we'll make our way to Atlanta and start the conversation with the Falcons. We'll do that right after this break. All right, Rand, going to make our way to Atlanta, but first, we're going to stop off. I got to go to the HR because producer Sharon over here embarrassing me during the break. Didn't ask me if I ever played Tecmo. He asked you, so I asked him why he didn't say that. Just because I was never an athlete. Okay, that's fine, Sharon. I'm making a note here, and you'll be getting a call from HR because number one, I was the quarterback and the center on my sixth grade football team. I did both, not at the same time. Number one. Number two, hit a home run first at bat in Little League. Don't worry that I got called out because I missed home plate because I was so excited, but that's not the point. But I got some skills. So let's just leave it. Let's move on to Atlanta. Man, Sharon done rocked my world. All right. Let's go to Atlanta. A team full of athletes, as it turns out. And this question, I wonder if I can beat this young man in a foot race, speaking of athleticism. But it's a good burning question because he has been off my radar. It's your burning question, Rand. What's next for Kirk Cousins? Now, Pittsburgh still seems to think, according to reports, that Aaron Rodgers is going to make his way to Western PA at some point. We have yet to see that. It feels like the musical chairs have stopped for Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, for example. I don't know what else is out there. But let's circle back. Is Kirk Cousins going to be an option in New Orleans? And if so, how high is that price going to be because it's inside the division?
One thing's for certain, two things for sure is I don't think Arthur Blank would ever trade any Falcon player to the New Orleans Saints within the division. I just don't see that happening. I'll say this. One thing we know for sure is that Kirk Cousins is going to make $27.5 million a year. No matter who's paying it, he's going to make it, right? Kirk has a way of making his money, so shout out to Kirk. But I think this could be a situation where after all the offseason fodder of where is he going to end up, who's going to trade for him, unless something happens in August or even at the trade deadline, we could very well see him suit up in the Atlanta Falcons uniform again this year.
So as a GM, let me ask you this. And Kirk, by all accounts, is a great dude, great teammate. Obviously, our buddy Rick Spielman signed him to the first guaranteed deal back in the day, 3 years, $80+ million, and only had glowing things to say about him. But is that going to – how do you sort through whether that's going to be an issue in the locker room now that this is Michael Penix Jr.'s team?
I think in this day and age, I don't think it will matter much. Now, the only question that'll come into play is if Michael Penix isn't playing well. And will he be on a short leash and allowed to play? Will he be given the time to play through some of these things? Or will they have the quick hook and pull and put Kirk in? Because they do have a team that they're expecting to compete for the division championship and to make the playoffs. So it's just a matter of how much leeway are they going to give Michael Penix Jr. if he's not playing well.
And because it's the same staff, the same OC, Zach Robinson, obviously the same head coach in Raheem Morris, you would imagine that leash might be a little longer because the whole point was Kurt was playing so poorly last year coming off that Achilles that their hand was almost forced to bring in the rookie, the guy that they drafted, the guy that they clearly liked, and what was at the time considered a surprise pick, 8th overall. Let me ask you this, as Titans GM, after you guys had taken J.C. Latham, were you shocked to see a few picks later Michael Penix Jr. go to Atlanta?
Actually, no, because unlike you, I listen to our friend JJ and see what he actually puts out and pay attention.
He did say that. That's right.
But no, in all honesty, we had been hearing for some probably a week or so prior to the draft that there was a real chance that Michael Penix would be in play for them. And we had on intel that it came down to Penix and Latu, the rusher from UCLA, as their two options there. And so we kind of figured that going in. But we'd already selected and we were on the press conference circuit, at that point. So it was free for all after that.
It's interesting you mentioned Latu as a possibility. 8, he didn't go until 15, just to goes to show you that the run on offensive players in last year's draft class, 1 through 14, I believe it was, were all offense, and then Latu came out 15th to the Colts. It's interesting that you mentioned edge rusher, because my burning question was about the 2 edge rushers that the Falcons took in the first round this year. Last year, they took Braylon Trice on day 2. He suffered an injury in August, so he didn't play at all. He'll be back, hopefully healthy and ready to go. But they also got Jalen Walker, and then they traded back into the first round for James Pierce Jr., and then in the third round, they got safety Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. So 2 edge rushers, one from Georgia, one from Tennessee, and then the safety from Notre Dame. And my burning question for you, Rand, is will those 3 picks, in addition to all the players they have coming back, will that finally transform this defense into something other than what was honestly been mediocre or worse in recent years, especially given now that Raheem Morris in year 2 is a defensive guy? Is he going to get those guys ship shape and make things easier for Michael Penix Jr.?
I believe so. And I believe this is why you take a rusher at 15 and then you jump back in and give up a future 1 to get another rusher. And I, for one, I love this draft class. Obviously, we're talking about the 2 guys at the top, but then Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman. Billy Bowman, I was a big fan of his. And I just love this draft class because it fits Raheem Morris and who he is as not only as a coach, but as a person. So you're going to see this Atlanta Falcons defense flying around. I think they have the makings to be a really good defense. And if you look at what they've done in their time at the Rams, they played a lot of young guys, early, regardless of where they took them, and allowed them to grow and mature. So that's what you're going to see out of this Atlanta Falcons defense this year.
Yeah, it feels like we talk about this division as being one of the weakest in the league, and this year it might be different. It feels like things are starting to come together. The Saints obviously have to figure some things out at the quarterback position, but this Falcons team feels like it's turning the corner. But you give me a hard time. Hope springs eternal in May during rookie minicamps, and that's where we are. That's the stage of the process we're in. But I think they've done the right things, the Atlanta Falcons, to put themselves in a position to have success. There are no lingering questions. There's no sort of Pittsburgh Steelers, who's going to be the quarterback type stuff going on there. So that's a good start. All right, let's make our way down to Tampa Bay. A team that perennially wins the division, and every year, this time of year, we just think that someone else is going to win the division, and Tampa Bay just does it. Baker Mayfield succeeded Tom Brady, and we often talk about, Brian Griese succeeded John Elway, I believe, and that's a lot of pressure on him. Didn't work out as well for him. Tommy Maddox, I think, was in that same conversation as well. Baker Mayfield, no such concerns, because Baker Mayfield does not care about anything except slinging it. But your burning question is an interesting one, and one that's similar to mine. They drafted Emeka Egbuka in the first round as sort of the eventual Michael Evans / Chris Godwin replacement when they get to that point. But your burning question is, you feel like they have enough, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do, to win the NFC South, but can they make a deep run in the playoffs? And that's a fair question. Is your bigger concern on offense or defense, or is it a combination of the 2?
I think it's a combination of the 2. And we know what they have at the receiver position if everyone's healthy. But you're still at the behest of Baker Mayfield and which Baker Mayfield shows up on that particular day. Is it the guy that's, playing out of his mind, making plays, extending the ball downfield and making explosives, or is he the guy that becomes a turnover machine? For one, I think they will be in the running to win the NFC South again. However, I just don't think they have enough just in the organization right now to make that deep playoff run and compete with the teams like Detroit and the Rams and Philly. I just don't think they have that. So that was why I posed the question, just to, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm off, and have you correct me for feeling this way.
Well, here's my burning question. It digs down just a little deeper. Have the Bucs done enough to remain the best team in the division? Because I just talked about the Falcons. The Panthers feel like a little upstarty, if you will. Defense, we got to sort that out. I think Bryce Young hopefully continues to progress. We don't know about the Saints. But is Tampa Bay do they have enough? Have they done enough to maintain that hold as the best team in that division?
I think the Falcons are going to push them, because regardless of the record in this division, it's really predominantly been a 3-team race: the Falcons, the Saints, and the Bucs. And on any given Sunday, because of that rivalry, these games can go any way. So I think the Falcons are going to really push Tampa Bay this year and have a chance to dethrone them and become the NFC South champions.
And I would argue that the biggest issue, and Tampa Bay, fans get angry when we don't give their team enough credit. Tampa Bay is a really good team. Todd Bowles has been awesome. Baker Mayfield's been a wonderful surprise, a lot of fun to watch. But I think the bigger issue for Atlanta, if they're going to make this push, maybe have less to do with Michael Penix Jr. and more to do with those defensive guys they drafted and finally getting after it and creating pressure, because your defense can carry you a long way, even if your offense is struggling early in the season. But those are questions that we'll find out together 114 days from now. All right, let's take another quick break here, Ray, and that's it for the NFC South. When we come back, we're going to turn our attention to the NFC North. We're going to start in Chicago, with Caleb Williams and the Bears. We'll do that right after the break. All right, Ryan, we're now headed to the NFC North. I just did some push-ups, went out in the yard, did some quick sprints. Still got my athleticism there. We're going to make it happen. All right, let's go to Cleveland. Let's go to Cleveland, then we'll keep driving west to go to Chicago and talk about the Chicago Bears, because here's my burning question, and I'm just going to let that lay the groundwork, and we'll get right to your burning question. But I wrote, will the 2025 Bears look like what we expected the 24 Bears to look like coming out of the gate? Because we spent a lot of time, not you, us in the media at the time, talking about how no quarterback in the history of civilization was better positioned than Caleb Williams coming in as a first-round pick with the pieces around him. Now, Matt Eberflus didn't last. The offensive coordinator got fired 6 weeks into the season. But your burning question drills down a little deeper. Did the Bears possibly have the best offseason of all 32 teams? And you're including faculty and staff when you look at that part of the website in terms of the guys they acquired to help put this team together, and then, of course, to call the plays and strategize leading up to those games.
Yeah, and I believe they did have the best offseason of all 32 teams because, like you said, it starts with getting the head coach. Over the last couple of years, Ben Johnson has probably been the most coveted coordinator to become a head coach, and the Bears were actually able to get him away from Detroit this year. And let's just, before we get on their players that they've acquired, let's look at this coaching staff. And I'm looking at my notes here. You have Ben Johnson, right, who's one of the bright offensive minds who we know what he's capable of doing on offense. Then you hire Dennis Allen to be your defensive coordinator. And then you were able to keep Richard Hightower as the special teams coordinator. But listen to these names for the assistant coaches. You got Eric Bieniemy as your running back coach. You got Antoine Randall as your receiver coach. You got Press Taylor, who is an up-and-coming young coach who will be a coordinator for someone as your pass game coordinator. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, you got Al Harris, who's a Pro Bowl, DB in this league. And now he's your defensive pass game coordinator. And you saw what he did in developing those corners in Kansas City and then again in Dallas, So they have a really good coaching staff. And then you go on the player acquisition side, you trade for Jonah Jackson, you trade for Joe Thuney to help shore up that offensive line. And then you sign Grady Jarrett, Dayo Odeyingbo to help the defense. And then you draft Colston Loveland and Luther Burden for this offense. I think this team is well positioned to make some noise and make a push in the NFC North. And I do think they've had the best offseason.
Hey, let me ask you about Rome Odunze's last year's second first-round pick. They took Caleb first, and then they got Rome in the top 10 there. In all your years in the front office, either as a director or as a GM, what constitutes the biggest jump for a second-year wide receiver who maybe didn't meet expectations in year one? What has to happen for them to get to the level that you thought they were going to be when you drafted them?
For one, I would say that he now has a true offseason. Last season, he didn't have an offseason. He went from training for a pro day and combine to right into the NFL season and I'm sure he didn't quite know what that was going to look like. And now he's had a full offseason to perfect his craft. But then you take a young guy, you pair him with a young quarterback, and then you put him in a veteran room with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. So now he's forced to take the back seat in that room and be a third option. And now with Keenan gone and him having another year of experience and being more comfortable, you can expect him to take a bigger jump because now he's more comfortable and he'll be more used to being himself and being more of a leader in that room.
All right, I'm going to ask you what seems like a crazy question, but maybe it isn't. Who has a better wide receiver / tight end room? The Chicago Bears or the Detroit Lions?
I will say from a physical talent perspective, I would probably say Chicago.
Okay.
And again, and we'll see where Detroit is, just in terms of how these guys were used and Ben Johnson being able to move guys around and get them in the best position. But I think from top to bottom, because you still have to add that Chicago still has Cole Kmet, right? So you got Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland versus the one tight end, the Iowa kid, I'm drawing a blank on his name,
Sam Laporta.
You just really have Laporta, in Detroit. And, Jameson Williams is a special talent, speed, and then we know what Amon-Ra St. Brown is, but I think you can get the same kind of production from Amon-Ra St. Brown as in DJ Moore. And then the other two is just a little bit different of a package. So don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, you did. You said the Bears. And Tim Patrick is currently listed as a starter in Detroit. And we'll talk about Detroit in a second. They drafted Isaac Tesla in the third round, traded up to get him. You mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown. They do have Sam Laporta. And Brock Wright, the blocking tight end, is the other tight end on that roster. And this is how deep the Bears are. I had forgotten about Cole Kmet, who is obviously a big part of that offense coming into this year. All right, the follow-up to this, and this is basically my burning question. This team feels like it should have a winning record and be making some noise for the worst-case wild card push. Is that fair to say about Chicago?
I think it is, and I think they will push. I think this system is more suitable for Caleb and his ability. And then I think because we're constantly talking about this offense, myself included. But then you look at what they've done defensively. They were already a really good defense last season. And now you go and you get the interior penetrator in Grady Jarrett. And then you have another big physical edge rusher in Dayo Odeyingbo to put opposite of Montez Sweat. And so I think this defense is well positioned to make some noise and be able to stop some of these NFC North offenses. And then this offense is going to be able to put up points.
Yeah, they drafted Tyreek Stevenson a few years ago in the second round. Got Zay Frazier, another long cornerback in this year's draft. Shamar Turner, who played on the inside of Texas A&M and made it being the best of that crew, which included Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, guys who were drafted in the first and second round. So no excuses in Chicago. Last year we thought that was the year. Maybe it was this year, 2025. All right, next up, let's go to Green Bay, the hosts for the 2025 NFL Draft. And that was a fantastic turnout there. They drafted Matthew Golden, Robert Golden, old school safety, used to play for the Steelers. Matthew Golden, Texas wide receiver, first-round pick. First time they've taken a first-round pick since, I think, Javon Walker back in 2002, if I recall correctly, for the Packers. And my burning question was, has Green Bay finally found their wide receiver one in Matthew Golden? And my follow-up to that before you answer that, Rand, is that I saw that Jaden Reed, their former second-round pick, who's an explosive wide receiver, his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, had some questions for the Packers about where Jaden Reed fits in, because they have what feels like 50 young wide receivers, some injured, some inconsistent, in that wide receiver room. So have they finally found their wide receiver one in Matthew Golden?
I'll say it this way. He definitely has the physical skill set to be a potential number one. However, understanding what Matt LaFleur's offense is, what this system is, and how the receivers play within this system, only time will tell. And I know he'll get every opportunity to be wide receiver one. I think if you're starting off right now, I think you have to give the nod to Jaden Reed just because of his playmaking skill set and the different ways that they could get him the ball. So I think time will tell. I think if he plays to his ability and keeps going on the onward trajectory that he's been on these last couple of years, I think he can work his way into being wide receiver one.
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to be a situation like we talked about with the Cleveland Browns earlier, if they're going to be looking to move on from some of these wide receivers. Christian Watson's obviously coming back from the injury, so he's not going to be ready anytime soon. But they do have what feels like a glut of wideouts there, young wideouts and playmakers at the tight end position as well. Your burning question is one that we keep coming back to, and nothing has yet happened. And I'll ask you this. Is it going to happen? Absent of a trade, how will Green Bay manage Jair Alexander this offseason or during the season? So if you look at the depth chart, they only drafted one defensive back, and that was late on day three, Micah Robinson. And behind Jair on the depth chart is Carrington Valentine, a former day 3 pick out of Kentucky, who's insanely athletic. I don't know if he's ready to play down in and down out. So to your question, your burning question, Rand, what's the deal with Jair?
I think it'll be fine initially. And then once the season gets going, depending on the type of season they're having, I think it could become a distraction late, and I think the trade will be revisited at the trade deadline. And this is just, I don't know Jair personally. This is just based off of some of the antics and some of the things I've heard throughout the years. I think this is one where, come trade deadline in October, they'll be looking to revisit.
So why not now then? What's the holdup?
You have to have a partner. And as talented as he is do teams have the infrastructure to kind of deal with this? And also his cap number. What is that cap number? Is he looking for more guaranteed money? Is he looking for an extension? These are all things you have to work through.
Yeah, and that's a good point because, Steelers fans are saying forever, if you're going to trade George Pickens, just get a second-round pick for him before the draft and trade up and get a quarterback or whatever the conversation was going to be. Turns out no team wanted to deal with George Pickens for that price, and I believe initially, according to reports, the Cowboys offered a fourth-round pick during the draft. The Steelers said, well, wait, and they finally upped it to a third-round pick last week. And George Pickens, his issues aren't on the field. They're all sort of maturity locker room stuff. And perhaps that's, to some degree at least, what's going on with Jair, who's a special player. There's no doubt about that. All right, Rand, let's take one more break here, and then we'll wrap out the NFC North with Minnesota and Detroit, and we'll do that right after this break. So the Minnesota Vikings were probably one of the biggest surprises last year, especially in the NFC with the way Sam Darnold played. He parlayed that into a huge deal out in Seattle, and now they're giving the keys to the car to J.J. McCarthy, last year's first-round pick. Didn't play at all because of a knee injury suffered during the preseason. And your burning question is very similar to mine. And I suppose if you want anyone given this task, it's Kevin O'Connell. But you ask, how can KOC once again work his magic, this time with J.J. McCarthy? And that's the question. What's the answer to that?
I believe he will. And if you go back and you look at since Kevin O'Connell took over as the head coach in 2022, he's had 6 different starters and has somehow managed to make the playoffs in 2 out of those 3 seasons. And so the proof is there that he's done it. As long as JJ is healthy, I think JJ has done if you go back to his Michigan tape, he did a really good job of playing point guard, right? And not doing anything too much outside of himself and just getting the ball into the hands of the people that can score. And he was just distributing the ball. So as long as he plays to that and listens to what O'Connell was saying and look at the proof, I think he'll be fine.
Right. Nick Mullins came in and had a spot start a few years ago, won some games. The passer, not Josh Dobbs, they traded for him, I believe, from Arizona at the time. He literally got off the plane and went right to the field, it felt like, and played well for a few games there as well. So if anyone is equipped to get the most out of these guys, it feels like KOC. And I want to see how JJ responds from being forced to take a year off. He actually looked pretty good in the preseason games he got to play in. I had some questions about him coming out of Michigan because, to your point, he was more point guard than what Michael Penix Jr. had to do or what Bryce Young had to do the year before that or what Jaden Daniels had to do last year, his final year at LSU. So we'll find out. But I think there are worse places to be if you're a young quarterback than in Minnesota. And my question was the exact same. Do you have any idea what to expect from J.J. McCarthy as a starter? So let me phrase that another way. If you're KOC, what are you doing to put him in the best position to have success? Are you just leaning on the run game early on? Are you putting it in the hands of Brian Flores and the defense early on, not asking him to do a lot? Or year 2, are you willing to open up the playbook a little more?
No, this takes me back to my very first year in scouting in 2008. We had drafted a young Matt Ryan and Mike. Dang it, again, drawing a blank. I'm getting old, Ryan. I'm almost your age. But
hey, Mike Smith?
Mike Smith. Mike Smith was the head coach. The offensive coordinator. He had been a coordinator in Pittsburgh, and he's going to shoot me for forgetting his name right now. But we brought Matt Ryan along slowly. We relied on the run game, let our defense play behind it, and we kept him in advantageous positions to just make high percentage throws. And then as the season went along, we started giving him more. Matt started asking for more and wanting more. And we took a previous year three-win team, and we were 11-5 team that made the playoffs. And so I would imagine a young quarterback, first year really playing in the NFL, coming off of an injury, you're not going to put too much on him early. And so you're going to lean on that run game. You're going to lean on high percentage throws and creativity because you still got to get Jordan Addison the ball. You still got to get Justin Jefferson the ball. You still got to get Hockenson the ball. But they're going to have to be a little bit more creative in doing that early until JJ is comfortable.
Mike Mularkey. I forgot Mike's name, too. I remember him being the OC of the Steelers. But you know what's funny? I was Googling it furiously. Arthur Smith has also been a coach/coordinator for the Steelers, the Falcons, and the Titans, which is all stops that Mularkey made. So I didn't think about that fun fact there as well. The funny thing about Matt Ryan, by the way, 2008, the first quarterback taken, I think Joe Flacco was the second in that class, is that coming out of BC, the knock on Matt Ryan is that he threw too many interceptions and tried to put too much on his shoulders. Different from JJ in that JJ didn't throw a ton of interceptions, but JJ didn't do a lot at Michigan. So there's some parallels there that there were some questions about both players coming out. And to your point, Matt hit the ground running, in part because of the offensive structure around him. So, and you know what? We talked to JJ. You're going to find this hard to believe at the Combine. I immediately fell in love. He was a great kid. Hopefully he can put it together because he has the physical tools. He has the arm. It's just a matter of getting those reps. KOC, no one better to do it, I would think. All right, let's go to Detroit, where they are now without Ben Johnson, the OC, now the head coach in Chicago, as we just talked about, and they're without the DC, Aaron Glenn, who's now the head coach in New York. And I'll ask my burning question first, which is basically your burning question. What will life look like without Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn? Because let's go back to Philadelphia when they lost their two coordinators, Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, take head coaching jobs with the Colts and the Cardinals. And to put it politely, it was a mess with the OCs and DCs that came in. Both those guys lasted 1 year, and then they had to reset. So how do you avoid that? I think that the Lions hired from within, and is that necessarily a good or bad thing in your mind?
No, it's not. It's not a bad thing because there's continuity in the messaging, right? You're not bringing someone out from the outside in to learn the Lion way of how we're going to do things when you have the people there in the building to kind of continue to carry the message, you know, that the guys have been hearing for a long time. But I went back and I looked at over the history of the game. How many times has this happened? And believe it or not, a team losing both coordinators in the same year, it's only happened 5 times in the history of the game. And the crazy stat coming off of that is all 5 teams made the playoffs the following year. And 2 won the Super Bowl.
The Eagles made the playoffs after?
Yeah, so the Eagles, if you remember, they started hot and then they went on a skid late and still managed to make the playoffs at 11-6. And so, again, all 5 teams coming off of losing both coordinators made the playoffs, and then the 94 49ers and the 04 Patriots won the Super Bowl. So things are in Detroit's favor. We'll see if they could continue to be the 6th team and have enough to take that next step and become Super Bowl champions.
Let's see if I can remember the 04. I think Charlie Weiss left for Notre Dame and Romeo Cornell maybe left for Cleveland at that point, if I recall correctly. And to your point about the Eagles making the playoffs, I had blocked that out of my mind because I think that's when they went to Tampa Bay and got absolutely roadhoused in that playoff game where they no-showed and they had to reset. And now they're the best team in football, and it's not even close. The other point is the continuity. There were questions about Nick Sirianni's. We would hear reports. I don't know how it was in the building about how secure his job was, this, that, and the other. No such concerns with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, it feels like. They feel like they're on the same page, have been from day one. And you almost to the point now where we sort of made fun of Dan Campbell for the bite kneecap stuff, but we collectively, and maybe you differ, but I just trust what they say, take it as gospel because they appear to know what they're doing.
Yeah, there's probably no one that I would trust more, especially when it comes to this draft cycle, than Brad Holmes and the work that Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew and John Dorsey and Dwayne Joseph, that those guys put in their front office to acquire players, not only via the draft, but in free agency as well. But it's like you said, it reminds me of where we were at the 49ers under Kyle and John and how we would lose coordinators and we would always promote from within. And it just kept the train rolling. And so even when we've lost offensive coordinators, although Kyle calls the plays, it was promotions from within and the train kept rolling. Now, the one time they go outside of the bubble, so to speak, and the 49ers hired Steve Wilks. And, you know, it could be an argument as to whether it was successful or not. I think they may have gone to the Super Bowl that year, or NFC Championship at least, and he was done after 1 year. And so even now, bringing back in Robert Saleh, he comes from within. He knows and understands what the day-to-day messaging is, the structure of practice, and how things are going to be. And this is what the Lions are doing. The Lions they promote from within, guys that have been there, guys who are familiar with the players. They understand how to use these players, and you're keeping the continuity and the consistency in the day-to-day messaging.
Yeah, John Morton is the new OC, and Kelvin Shepard is the new DC. When Steve Wilkes was the DC in San Francisco, it was they lost 3 games in the middle of the season. One of those games was in Minnesota, where I know the report was Shanahan was angry with the cover 0 call that led to probably a score before the end of the first half. Also, those 3 games they lost in a row, Trent Williams did not play. I know he doesn't play defense, but he, when I looked at that list of top 15 all-time earners, the only non-quarterback on there was a young man named Trent Williams. So clearly he's very important to what they did during that year. All right, let's talk about some of these burning questions for this NFC East teams. We'll start in that division. We'll start with the New York Giants, Rand. And look, man, a few teams have crushed the offseason like the New York Giants. They've had a great start to finish from at the end of the season in January through where we are right now. Really good free agency, obviously really good draft with Abdul Carter traded back up to pick 25 to get Jackson Dart. I was watching a behind-the-scenes from the Giants website via their YouTubes about just – the pressure that Joe Shane was apparently under trying to get back into the first round, because it was clear to them they want Jackson Dart. Right around pick 18, they started making calls, and it was hard to find a partner until I believe Nick Caserio finally agreed to trade down from Houston. So dodged that bullet, so they got their quarterback. But the burning questions, and my burning question relates to Jackson Dart, but let's go with yours first. You asked, do they have enough offensive weapons to compete in the heavy NFC East? And, of course, it starts with Malik Neighbors. They didn't draft anybody early on. They did get Juice Wells out of Ole Miss. They have Zach Pascal, who they signed. Darius Slayton, who we know and whose sister we met at the Colorado Showcase. She works for Coach Prime there. And then Jalen Hyatt, who has not yet quite figured things out. So that's a fair question. And what is the answer? I'll ask you.
Well, my answer is no. And I'll just simply say, if you look at what the other secondaries in this division have, they have really strong secondaries. And we know what Malik Neighbors is. He's a legit number 1 receiver in this league. However, when you match him up against the Cowboys secondary and the Eagles secondary and the Commanders secondary, he's going to need that other person next to him that can make moves and that can get open and create one-on-one situations. And right now, I just don't see the Giants having that. I will say, though, this defense is built, to compete within the division. However, I just don't think they'll have enough offensive weapons to score points to keep up.
And the other concern is this, and the schedule came out last night, and if you need PR, I would encourage you to hire the NFL, because they can make anything exciting. They make a commissioner reading names off a card the most exciting thing in the offseason. They make we knew all the teams that were going to face each other, but the fact that they had this huge schedule release, they made that exciting. And I mentioned that to say, good luck finding a team with a tougher schedule than the New York Giants. And that leads me to my burning question. And we knew coming into this offseason, because ownership had made it clear that they were running out of patience with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. With jobs on the line, can the Giants be patient with Jackson Dart? Now, we say every year right after a team drafts a quarterback, we're going to be patient with him. And then when the rubber meets the road and you start off 1-4, things change. So can they afford to be patient? And if they do start off 1-4, when are we going to see Jackson Dart? Because I would imagine it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I agree. I think like you said, the big question is, can you be patient? And you were already talking about an offseason where the owner has come out and said that he's running out of patience. So that's the quagmire that you put yourself in when you take one of these quarterbacks that is going to need a little bit of time. And so, with this schedule, like you said, the NFL schedule makers did the Giants no favors. Them and the Cleveland Browns, who both teams have quarterback questions, and now you put them in this tough gauntlet of having probably the toughest 2 schedules in the league. I think you're going to see these guys very quickly, and then we'll see where John Mara and the rest of the owners sit, in terms of being patient with Daboll and Joe Shane.
Not knowing what the record will be and not trying to predict it, but knowing that the schedule is the toughest in the league according to strength of schedule based on last year, I'm going to give you a date, and you tell me whether we see Jackson Dart before or after that date. Halloween, October 31st.
Halloween. So that puts us at about how many games? 8, 9?
Weeks. Yeah, that's right.
About 8, 9. I'll go with it. I'll go with it. I'm with you. I'll follow you there. I think we'll see him by then. And if you could look at that, I mean, find a win in there for him. On this front end of the schedule, find a win.
Maybe week 5 at New Orleans, only because we don't know who the quarterback's going to be in New Orleans, but sweet mercy alive. I don't know what Joe Shane and Brian Dable did in their previous life to get this schedule, but I hope they've been doing a lot of praying between last night when the schedule came out and the start of the season, because, that's going to be a wild ride. We'll see. Maybe they'll be a playoff team and surprise us all. Next up, a team that is expected to be a playoff team every single year, and they usually win a lot of games and get to the playoffs and don't play so well. That, of course, is the Dallas Cowboys. They have a new coach, and they have a new wide receiver in George Pickens. Your burning question, can the Cowboys threaten the Eagles and Commanders for the division crown? On paper, I think so. It just feels like they can't seem to get out of their own way. Brian Schottenheimer is, of course, the coach. Fans weren't excited about it. That's just the reality of it. I think that's one of the reasons Jerry released the news on a Friday night. But here we are, Rand. So can the Cowboys threaten the Eagles and the Commanders for the division? All these teams in this division, Rand, have tough schedules. So in that sense, it's sort of balanced there. But what do you think about that?
Again, I'll go no. and I'll say, but I do think that this team is built to make the playoffs. And so I don't think that they'll beat the Commanders or the Eagles out for the division crown. However, I do think it's a strong possibility that they could be the third team in their division to make the playoffs. And I think the last time that's happened was in 2022 when it was the NFC East that had 3 teams to make the playoffs. So I could see the Cowboys factoring in that field there.
Yeah, and I believe the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns did it during Joe Flacco's year. That might have been 2023. So on the other side, we have seen it. It's just incredibly difficult. And here's a not-so-fun fact if you're a Cowboys fan via the CBS Sports Research Department. Dallas is the first team in NFL history with 6 straight games, 6 straight, versus teams that won at least 11 games last year. So, again, I would encourage Brian Schottenheimer to do some praying because it's going to be tough sledding. My burning question,
Ryan, if I could throw in on their schedule, they also have 4 Thursday night games.
So Jerry Jones made somebody angry in the front office is what I'm hearing. And the front office being the NFL front office, because I know that players certainly don't like Thursday night games. I would imagine ownership and front office staff don't like them either to certain degrees. You see the schedule here. My burning question is, Rand, how do you manage George Pickens, who obviously the Steelers were willing to move on from, even though he could legit be a top 5 wide receiver when he's locked in? The question is, when is he going to be locked in? How do you manage him in that locker room when he's also going in the final year of his rookie deal? He has said that he's willing to wait until after the season to get that new deal, but he said a lot of other things, too, that didn't necessarily play out the way the Steelers had hoped anyway.
Well, here's what I know about the Dallas Cowboys, and we've talked about this here, on the podcast. They have an ecosystem that supports quote-unquote troubled guys, and they've had the Pac-Man Joneses and the Alden Smiths and the Tank Johnson. So they understand how to do this, and they have a history of doing it. And again, he's on a 1-year prove-it deal, so to speak. And so in order for him to get his big payday that he's coveting, he's going to have to be on his best behavior. And I think we'll see that for at least a year, and we'll see what happens from there.
And to your previous point, this team actually on paper is lights out. Dak Prescott is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. CeeDee Lamb now has George Pickens. When you look at the other side of the ball, they've drafted really well this year. Donovan Ezra, who's the edge rusher. Subone Rebel is going to have a chance to start as a long outside corner. Tyler Booker was the 12th overall pick, the guard from Alabama, who's going to be probably a starter on day one. So, again, on paper, this feels like a team that's going in the right direction. We got like 45 seconds left. Let me ask you this. Is Brian Schottenheimer an upgrade over Mike McCarthy in terms of offensive play calling?
I say no. And, that's Gator on Gator crime there. Schotty played quarterback, on the 96 national championship team. But I'd say no just because of McCarthy's history, and we've seen him do it and do it at a high level.
Yeah, and we'll find out together. And it was an interesting move, and Jerry Jones has made all these promises about how the team was going to do things that they ultimately didn't seem to do. The George Pickens thing is certainly a move in the right direction. We'll all find out together about the Cowboys and the Giants when we come back. We're going to find out about the other 2 teams in this division. the two of the favorites, the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles. And we'll start with Washington right after this break. Welcome back to With the First Pick, or as I like to call it, Rand's Party Town, because Rand is all about doing birthday parties in the summertime, so give him a call. He's got to do one for his soon-to-be 7-year-old, and he ain't following the rules, and by that I mean you, Rand. The rule is age plus 1 is how many people can come to the party. So your son's turning 7, it's going to be 8, so you having 8 people or more at that party?
It's going to be way more than that. I feel like most people that have RSVP'd are plus 8s. So it's going to be a big blowout for him.
Yeah, this ain't like my 1987 birthday party when it was just me and my family. And my dad said, "Oh, just enjoy it. It's fun." It was a different time, man. All right, let's talk about the Washington Commanders. Speaking of different times, because that team has turned things around as soon as ownership changed, and as soon as Adam Peters came in as GM, and as soon as they drafted Jaden Daniels, having a franchise quarterback certainly helps. And they had a fantastic season last year. And I think Jaden Daniels is an example of someone who, when it clicks, he can go from being a mid-day 3 pick to being one of the best players in the draft and now the NFL. So that was a fun story. But the fun's over, Rand. Your burning question is this. Are you surprised that the Commanders didn't address their defensive end needs at any point during the offseason? And I'll guess the follow-up to that is that going to be an impediment to them getting where they want to get to?
Yeah, and I am surprised, especially when you consider head coach Dan Quinn's background as a defensive line coach and all the great defenses that he's had, whether it was in Seattle, Atlanta, and Dallas, they all had edge rush presence. And so right now you have Dorrance Armstrong, you have Cleveland Farrell as your primary edge guys. And I know they do some creative things with Frankie Louvu and they rush him off the edge and, get matchups for him. But like you said, I think this will be an impediment, if anything, for this defense to continue going forward because they've upgraded the secondary. I like what they've done with their additions in the secondary. Now you need to tie that with the rush. And I think they still need some guys off the edge.
Yeah, and by my count, they only had 5 picks in the draft. Josh Connerly Jr., not necessarily a surprise pick, but went to the bottom of the first round like we expected. You talked about the defensive additions. Trey Amos they drafted in the second round, had first-round talent, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. So they addressed some of their needs, but obviously not all of them, and sometimes that's hard to do in the draft, but certainly in free agency. We'll see how this works out. Jonathan Allen's gone, of course. Javon Kinlaw they signed. That's sort of a replacement quotation marks here. And, of course, Deron Payne's still there. And we'll see how they sort through all that because, again, this division is incredibly tough, and the schedule for this division is incredibly tough. And I'll just mention this. Washington has 8 standalone games, primetime games on an island, if you will, tied for most in the NFL with the Chiefs and the aforementioned Cowboys. You can see it here. Again, week 1 division matchup against the Giants in Washington. So that'll be the intrigue starts immediately for both those teams. My burning question for the Commanders, how do you build on the 2024 season and not get complacent? And you've been at places both in L.A. and San Francisco, and even in Atlanta, where you've had success. And how do you maintain that success and don't go into the season thinking, okay, we got most of the same guys back. We can just run it back and not be an issue. What's the coaching message? What's the front office message to sort of keep everyone laser focused on the task at hand?
And it's exactly what you said. It's don't get complacent. And if you know anything about Dan Quinn is one of the best motivators that we have in our league at the head coach position. So whether that's motivating coaches to motivate their players or just directly motivating the players, I think he has the it when it comes to that to get it done. And then again, they bring in a certain type of guy, a guy that has a certain type of edge, a certain type of drive, and just an overall certain type of leadership. That's what Adam Peters helped build in San Francisco, and that's what he's building now in Washington. So I don't expect him to have any type of lag at all when it comes to that.
All right, we know the Eagles are the favorites. I'll just ask you here, how close can the Commanders get to the Eagles in terms of making a run at the division?
I think if you pick one team within the division that can push them, it would be the Commanders. However, I just think from top to bottom, this Eagles team is just a little too deep at most places for them to really be pushed. Again, this is all barring injury and everyone staying healthy, but I still think the Eagles are the class of this division.
All right, let's talk about Philadelphia a little more in depth here. And we talked about this on Tuesday's podcast, how they they've always had dudes over the last 3, 4, 5 years. But when they changed their coordinators who got head coaching jobs in Indianapolis and Arizona, they took a little dip, as you reminded me. They still made the playoffs, but they got the doors blown off in that playoff game. And then they had to reset, got Kellen Moore, got Vic Fangio, and they were back to cooking with gas. Kellen Moore is now in New Orleans, so they have a new OC. Vic Fangio is still there, but your larger point remains, top to bottom, good luck finding a better team, and that includes the team they whooped up on in the Super Bowl in the Kansas City Chiefs. Your burning question: do the Eagles have enough on defense to repeat as champions? And my question to your question is, why do you think they don't have enough?
I think and I was just going through looking at their roster prior to coming on, and you look at it from top to bottom, again, it is one of the best rosters, if not the best roster in the league. And especially when you look at what they've done in the secondary. And then if you look at the guys that play, the linebacker at the second level position, if they're healthy, they'll be fine. And they have dogs on that defensive line, which they've always had. However, if you think about a Philly defensive front, you've always known them to have a plethora of dudes off the edge. And right now, you have Nolan Smith, who came on in his sophomore year. I think he led the team in sacks possibly. And then Jalix Hunt really came on in the Super Bowl. But outside of those two, you don't really have depth on the edge. And so someone in that room is going to have to step up to give them more depth there that they've always had and what they've always been known for.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. They drafted Ty Robinson, who's a defensive end. He's not an edge rusher, out of Nebraska. He was a fun watch during the course of the fall. Nakobe Dean's still banged up. The linebacker had that serious knee injury out of Georgia. Of course, they drafted Jahad Campbell and Smile Munden, so they may be set there no matter what Nakobe's health is going forward. Does Jalix Hunt still feel like a DPR, a designated pass rusher at this point? He's still incredibly raw, former safety that moved over there. Are you okay giving him more reps on first and second down, for example?
I mean, he's going to have to get reps regardless. That's the natural evolution of him becoming a full 3-down player. But I do see Jalix Hunt's role being similar to what Josh Sweat's role was early. And just coming in, being that fastball off the edge and the guy that's being able to be disruptive. And maybe they play a Jomo on the early downs and have him be the physical edge setter opposite of Nolan Smith, and then bring Jalix in to rush the passer in those creative packages. Now, they're still going to need another interior rusher. Because Big Jordan Davis is a first and second down plugger. And so he's going to have to be able to, they're going to have to be able to find, someone next to, I'm just going to call him the animal, the man child over there on the other side, to be able to rush interior wise. So again, a little bit more questions than they probably had up front, but I think if anybody's going to be able to figure it out, it's Philly and defensive coordinator Vic Fangio.
Right. And Vic Fangio is going to be a big part of that success, because we've seen a couple years ago when the defensive coordinator wasn't exactly on the same page with the defense, and things went sideways a little bit here. Here's my burning question, and we'll keep it to the offensive side of the ball because we just talked about the defense. And then my question says, other than unforeseen injuries, what's the biggest issue facing the offense in terms of getting back to where they want to get to? Because I don't know what it would be. I mean, the offensive coordinator is now Kevin Patulio. But other than that, I don't think you come in and change a lot, because if it ain't broke, sort of thinking here. So in your mind, what would potentially be a roadblock to this team getting back to where they want to get to?
I mean, you just said it, the new offensive coordinator, Kevin Patulio. We haven't seen him in this role. We don't know how he's going to be in terms of managing the different personalities, because you have to get AJ the ball. You're going to have to get Goddard the ball. You're going to have to get Devontae Smith the ball. So can he handle those personalities and then dial it up on a week-to-week basis? And so that's tough, and that's a tough thing to do, and he's never done it. And so we're going to have to grow with him. Even though he has all the talent in the world to get it done, he's still a first-time coordinator that's going to have to grow into this role.
They also have Cam Williams, who they drafted the right tackle out of Texas, as depth there. They did lose Mekhi Becton. I think they'll be okay in terms of that. And I'm just going to say this, Rand. They drafted Kyle McCord, guy in the 6th round. They traded for DTR from Cleveland prior to that when they sent Kenny Pickett to Cleveland, and Tanner McKee's on the roster. What do they end up trading one of these players for after they ball out in the preseason? Because it feels like Howie Roseman knows what's up when he puts these guys on the roster.
My man Howie, he finds a way to get it done, get picks, and get probably more than most people would value for. But I think the number one guy that would probably get moved would be DTR because he started games in this league, and then I think you would get a day three pick for him. Probably something higher than what they paid to get him. That's Howie's MO and how he rolls. But 9 times out of 10, if it's a team trading for him, it's a team that's desperate and needs a quarterback.
Yeah, they got a 5th-round pick, I believe, when they made that trade. And our buddy Rick Spielman is quite familiar with Howie Roseman because he had to give a 1st-round pick after Teddy B went down to get your guy, Sam Bradford, back in the day. So Howie ain't playing. All right, let's take a quick break. That's it for the NFC East. When we come back, we'll talk about the NFC West. And we'll start with the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe you're primed to be a playoff team? Talk about that right after this. All right, Rand, let's head to Northern California. Your former stomping grounds, the San Francisco 49ers. And if you didn't like the 49ers, last year was a year for you because they were beset by injuries and they just couldn't get out of their own way. And you can't do anything if all your best players are hurt outside of Brock Purdy, which brings me to your burning question. When will the Brock Purdy deal get done? And I'll add this addendum. Will it be $50 million a year or higher? Question mark.
So I think it'll get done by the end of OTAs. Just looking at it, I think the 49ers currently have the 3rd most cap space with around 38 million or so in space. So they have the room to get it done. I don't think it'll get to 50 million. I think it will be in that low 40 range because that allows them to continue to build around him. Right. And you're not put in a position where you're just hamstrung by the quarterback's deal and you're putting it all on him. I think Brock Purdy is very secure in who he is and what he needs to be successful. And I think putting him in that $50 million a year range will kind of hamstring what this team can be moving forward.
All right, former GM, if I'm Brock Purdy's agent, I come back to you and say, hey, man, it ain't my problem. Your problem is to build a team. My guy is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He held the team together last year. I'm going to push a sheet of paper back across to you that has a 5 in the front of it. What do you say to that?
I take it and I say, thank you. We'll be in touch. And then I go on about my business because they still have in their back pocket, they still have the franchise tag. And so the deal does not have to get done, this year. And Brock is going to continue to play on his rookie deal. That'll give him a 4th-year deal. I mean, the 4th year of the deal. And then now you have the franchise tag 2 years in a row to potentially use. So, are you going to pass that up for I won't say what I was on the tip of my tongue, but, are you going to pass that up? I'll just say that.
And as his agent, I would say, listen, that man made $900,000 a year and had to live with a roommate because it's so expensive in San Francisco. Can a brother get a break? The other thing I would ask you is this, and you can speak as honestly or not honestly as you want. Is there a thinking inside that building that Kyle Shanahan can overcome a lot with whoever the quarterback is? And Brock Purdy, to his credit as Mr. Irrelevant, has earned every penny he is going to get. He has been special. But other than, say, compared to other coordinators, it feels like Kyle Shanahan can mask some of the shortcomings, physical or otherwise, of your quarterbacks. Is that fair to say in terms of thinking about how the quarterback situation might resolve itself?
Well, I'll say yes. Kyle Shanahan knows how to do different things to put quarterbacks in the best situations possible. However, go back to the year Brock Purdy started. We started off the year with Trey Lance as the starter. Then you go to Jimmy Garoppolo, and then you went to Brock Purdy. And I think if you go back and look at it, Kyle called 3 different offenses that year. Right. So you got a guy in Brock Purdy that fits exactly what Kyle wants to do and what Kyle wants to be offensively. And so you don't want to have to put a makeshift guy in there to kind of do some different things and totally takes you off of who you are.
So this is worth noting, again, with the schedule coming out yesterday, the 49ers have the easiest strength of schedule, of any team since the 2015 Falcons. None of the final 7 games versus 2024 playoff teams. So you can see that here. So this could be a situation where now everyone's healthy. Brandon Ayuka's coming back from the ACL. Hopefully he's healthy enough to contribute. They have Ricky Pearsall, who's going to be healthy, knock on wood, and he's going to be the number 1 or number 2, depending on how that sorts out. George Kittle just got his deal. All those things are great. The strength of schedule is great. And I want to use this opportunity, and I'll burn my burning question on this, Rand. And you talked about this yesterday on HQ with our buddy B-Mac. Strength of schedule for the 49ers could be a situation where they find themselves in the playoffs, but you were also thinking about a team like the Bills who could benefit from strength of schedule situations as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, the Bills' strength of schedule is right there with the 49ers. I believe if you had to rank them, they're both within the top three. But if you're Buffalo, think about having people have to come play playoff football in the month of January in Buffalo with that weather that they're not used to. Like, that's totally to the benefit of the Buffalo Bills. So whoever put the schedule together, he really threw Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane and the crew in Buffalo. He threw them a nice little lob. Now they have to take it and go dunk it.
By the way, week 9, Kansas City at Buffalo, CBS. So mark your calendars now because that's going to be exciting. All right, let's move to the Arizona Cardinals, a team that I think Monty Ossenfort's done an amazing job the last 2 years with the draft of putting this team together. And their first-round pick a year ago, Darius Robinson battled injuries. He's going to be healthy this year. They got Walter Nolan in round 1. In round 2, they got Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan. We've talked about him a lot as a first-round talent. We just didn't know how fast he was. And, Rand, your question is pretty straightforward. Is this team built to win the NFC West? Because secretly, there are a lot of good teams. The Rams, of course, and then we just talked about the 49ers. Are the Cardinals in position to make a move?
I say no. And to your point, I love what Monty has done. I love what he's done. I love the way he's constructed this team. He has not deviated too far outside of what he believes and his thought process on how to build a team. I just think the NFC West is just too tough. Again, we're talking about a healthy 49ers team coming back this year with a poor strength of schedule. We're talking about a 10-win Seahawks team that didn't make the playoffs last year. And then you have the Rams returning, and they've added some additions on their offense. So I just think based off of the division that they're in, it's just going to be too tough for them to win that division.
And you look at their schedule here, and according to strength of schedule based on last year, the Cardinals are near the top in terms of having the weakest strength of schedule. They're not quite as easy as the 49ers, but they're certainly in the mix, and that'll make things a little easier for them. My question is this, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was good last year. He wasn't lights out great. He wasn't as good as Malik Neighbors. I don't think anyone would argue with that. Certainly not as good as Brian Thomas Jr., who was drafted later in the first round. What does Marvin Harrison Jr. have to do to get over the hump and look more like the Ohio State Marvin Harrison Jr. than what we saw in terms of some of the inconsistencies last year? Like, what's he working on through the offseason? We sort of had a similar conversation on Tuesday about Roma Dunze. So what are you doing if you're Marvin to get better?
I think it's him spending as much time as possible with Kyler Murray, because there's a difference in all the other receivers that you talked about and what they've had at quarterback and the people throwing them the ball. You know, Kyler Murray is a guy, because he's shorter, and if you're Marvin Harrison Jr., who's a precise route runner, you just only see the ball coming out, right? And it's coming out, and he's got a strong arm, and it's coming on you fast. And then you're talking about a guy in Kyler Murray that moves around a lot, which now you have to break off your route and do some things that Marvin Harrison may not just be comfortable doing or used to doing. So therefore, I think having a full offseason now to spend as much time with Kyler Murray and getting on the same page and understanding when Kyler Murray breaks contain, what he's looking to do, and get them. Like, if you look back to when Aaron Rodgers was in Green Bay and they would run their scramble drill, or Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh, all those guys that turned into backyard football, and they all seem to be on the same page. And that took time for that to happen. So I think you're going to see the same thing with Arizona, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray.
And something else you talked about previously is that a lot of these kids, and Marvin maybe is the exception because he didn't work out during the pre-draft process, but I would imagine his workout has changed now that he's become a pro full-time and isn't focused on whatever the kids are focused on coming out of college between January and May when the actual draft happens. One other thing I want to ask you about, this wide receiver room is okay. It starts with Marvin Harrison Jr. They have Michael Wilson, who I like out of Stanford, but I wouldn't call him necessarily number 2. They have Zay Jones, and then of course they have Trey McBride, one of the best tight ends in the league. And then at running back, they have James Conner and Trey Benson. Is this a situation, if you're Monty Ossenfort, you're looking perhaps over the course of training camp and when guys start getting cut for some wide receiver help?
Most definitely. You got to add someone opposite of him. And if you look back at all our mock drafts, I think we were kind of consistent with them either taking a receiver or a corner in their first round pick, and saying to put a vertical threat outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. to create some space for him. And right now you just don't have that. And so I think as they go and they look, and there are going to be a bunch of teams who are stacked at wide receiver who are going to have some guys come open. You're going to see some player-for-player trades. You're going to see some late-round swap with trade. So I do think that'll be a position that they're going to address and look to address during the preseason.
I don't know. I haven't heard any specifics, but it is perhaps telling that the Cardinals maybe weren't interested in George Pickens, and maybe a third-round pick felt too high to them. But that wide receiver room would be transformed with the talent that George Pickens brings. But maybe the locker room stuff is something that teams don't want to deal with, and I understand that. But we'll have to find out together how this unfolds, because it feels like they could certainly add a player, maybe even two players to the wide receiver room to give Kyler a little help there. All right, we're halfway through here, the NFC West. We'll take one more quick break here, Rand. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Fighting Sam Darnolds and the Fighting Matthew Staffords. And it's interesting. We just saw that graphic. The Seahawks are picked to finish last in the division, which is crazy. You just talked about they won 10 games, but they have a new quarterback. They have a head coach going into year 2, and they have a lot of new pieces there. Their wide receivers are gone for the most part. But we'll talk about that in detail, and also the LA Rams right after this break. All right, Rand, we're down the home stretch here. NFC West, heading to Seattle, the Seattle Seahawks. Mike McDonald going into year 2. Quarterback Sam Darnold going into year 1 in Seattle after that strong performance in Minnesota. Burning question. And this, your burning question relates to a lot of the things we talked about during the pre-draft process of the mock drafts in terms of who the Seahawks might target. Can the offensive line keep Sam Darnold upright? Because when Sam Darnold is protected, he can sling it. When he is not protected, he looks like Sam Darnold. So that is the question to you. Can they protect him, Rand?
Why you have to say it like that, Ryan?
I got an idea. And by the way, Gray Zabel was their first-round pick out of North Dakota State. He's going to start at left guard probably. Can they protect him, Rand?
I'm going to take a page out of Ryan Wilson's book and say, we'll find out together. And I say that because Seattle's offensive line allowed the third most sacks last year. I think they gave up 54 sacks in total. And like you said, they drafted Gray Zabel. You put him over there with Charles Cross as the left tackle, and I think their left side of their offensive line should be fine. However, I think there are still questions from the center out to the right tackle spot. So I think those questions still remain. But like you said, Sam Darnold that you can keep upright is a Sam Darnold that's going to be efficient, that's going to be accurate, and that's going to be able to get the ball into the hands of their playmakers. However, a Sam Bradford that's under duress, we saw what that looked like down the stretch from Minnesota, particularly those last couple, 2-3 games in which he didn't fare well.
So you're quite familiar with the Shanahans, having worked for Kyle, and you know his dad. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Gary Kubiak, but his son Clint is now the OC in Seattle. Last year, he was the OC in New Orleans. They got off to a pretty red-hot start, and then the wheels started to fall off. What can we expect from that sort of Kubiak-style offense in terms of helping Sam Darnold get the best version of himself?
I think you're going to see a 49er-style offense because if you can remember, I think it's been 2 years now, Clint was working in San Francisco under Kyle when Sam Darnold was there. And so there's familiarity there. There'll be familiarity with the calls, the checks, and because this offense requires a lot out of the quarterback in terms of formations and motions and all of those different things. And I think Sam Darnold's coming into a system that he's already run and he's already comfortable with. And so I think Kubiak, I like Kubiak a lot. I've liked him for a while. And I think he'll now settle into this role. This may be his third stop, as a coordinator. And now you finally have a quarterback that you have some rapport with, that unequivocally what he can and can't do.
Yeah, my burning question was similar to yours. How do you keep Sam Darnold from backsliding like we saw with the Jets and the Panthers? And we sort of explained that. So I'll take my question to the other side of the ball. What is Mike McDonald going to do with Nick Emmanwori, the safety out of South Carolina, who feels like his version of Kyle Hamilton, who was obviously the chess piece in the middle of that Ravens defense when Mike McDonald was there, and he's still balling out there. So how do you use an incredibly athletic safety like Emmanwori? And maybe that's something similar to what the 49ers did with Hufanga when they had him there.
Yeah, I think in this defense, they're going to move him around. He'll essentially be your quote-unquote big nickel. on early downs, a guy that you can bring down to the box. And at his size, 6'3", 6'4", 225 pounds, he's going to be an extension of a linebacker in some of those phases, right? Because if he's your big nickel, 9 times out of 10, he's going to be the C-gap defender in the run game and in the run fit. So versus having a 5'9", nickel in the game that has to constant 5'9", let's say 185-pound nickel, that's having to stick his face in the C-gap and take on guards and tackles. Now you have a bigger body. And, regardless of what our buddy Pete Prisco says, I think he can play on the back end and be in the post. And it gives you a situation now where you have the 2-deep coverage. You can rock and roll, your safeties, and you don't have to designate one solely as a free and one solely as a strong. You can just do some creative things on the back end with it.
Yeah, just go watch the LSU game if you have any questions about his ability to play in space. He ran in the 4.3s, and at 225, 230, he is not afraid to come down and contribute in the run game. And by that, I mean throw his body around and thump people. So that's going to be fun for sure. All right, let's go to your other former stomping grounds, the Los Angeles Rams here. Your burning question for this team: how likely are we to see the Rams and Jalen Ramsey, have a reunion? Because if you recall, a few years ago when that trade happened, I believe it was for a first-round pick, that team ended up going to and winning the Super Bowl. So is it going to happen again a few years later? I think Jalen Ramsey's probably now 30. And how big a need is it to necessitate perhaps making that move?
No, it's definitely a need for them. And I think their corner position does need addressing. And also, if you look at it, they didn't draft anyone to fill any of those spots there on the perimeter. And so going back and you look at it, the Rams currently have $20 million or so in cap space, and Jalen's currently carrying a cap number of 16.6 for this year. Now, I know some of his offseason bonus has already been paid out, which was due in March. And so that's kind of dwindled some of the money down. But I guess the next big hurdle, not only compensation of what you're going to have to give the Dolphins to acquire him, but what contract demands does Jalen Ramsey have? And you mentioned his age, and how much are you willing to invest in a 30-plus-year-old corner at this point?
Yeah, so you look at their roster. Darius Williams is the starting cornerback. His backup is Kobe Durant, who's more of a nickel, I would argue. Akello Witherspoon, who's bounced around the league, was in San Francisco and Pittsburgh. He's made a little home in L.A. the last few years. And behind him, Darian Kendrick out of Clemson in Georgia, who didn't run a great 40 time when he came out, but he certainly played better than that. And Emmanuel Forbes, the former first-round pick of the Commanders, who is no longer there, obviously, in Washington. So they do have some needs in the secondary, which is – at least at the cornerback, which is curious because they've been so good at drafting those guys on the front seven last year, of course. Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, Kobe Turner the year before that, and Byron Young. Offensively, they're in a pretty good spot. Let me ask you this. They're different players, obviously, by a large margin, but Cooper Kupp is now in Seattle. Devontae Adams is now in L.A. Is there going to be any drop-off production-wise? Is going to be an increase in production, assuming both players when they're sort of fully healthy? What does that look like? What does Devontae Adams bring to this offense for Matthew Stafford?
I'm interested to see the fit because I know kind of with Puka Nacua when he came along, if you remember Puka's rookie year, Cooper Kupp was hurt. And so Puka essentially filled that role that Cooper Kupp was in, the guy that they move around, they play him on the outside, they play him in the slot, they motion him, they insert him in the run game, and he's physical in the run game. So now I'm really interested to see, in quote-unquote aging Devontae Adams, how much of a threat he's going to be on the perimeter. Because I don't think at this point he's going to be the guy that's going to be able to take the top off and be a vertical threat outside of a double move. So I'm interested to see how Sean works him in. Now, again, we are talking about Sean McVay, and Sean clearly has a plan for him, which is why they signed him. But I think the production at worst will be the same. I don't think it'll be a drastic drop-off because once Puka came along, Cooper Kupp saw his role kind of diminish and his targets diminish. So I think you'll see probably about the same production.
It's funny now, every time that the Rams draft a wide receiver in a post-Puka Nacua world, we try to figure out who the next Puka Nacua is going to be. Puka's issue coming out was he just couldn't stay healthy. There was no doubting his playmaking ability. I think he ran in the 4.5s, but the Rams knew that he played faster than that, just like I would imagine every other NFL team knew. I mentioned that because Jordan Whittington last year, day 3 pick out of Texas, showed some flashes of being able to do a little bit more than perhaps people thought based on his tape at Texas, where he wasn't asked to do a whole bunch. And I mentioned that because this year, on day 3, they took Konate Mumpfield out of Pitt. And my comp for him coming out was Deontay Johnson. He ran to the 4.5s, so that didn't help his cause. That's why he lasted later than he did. But when I talked to Konate, the Shrine Bowl, he said that back in the day, he was watching a Steelers game with his mom, and his mom said, hey, that guy runs like you, Deontay Johnson. So I finally got one of those comps right. That's to say there's an opportunity for some of these young guys to step up because Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, after that is pretty wide open. You have Tutu Atwell. The tight ends, though, I'll mention this. They have Tyler Higbee, and then they have Terrence Ferguson, who they drafted in the second round, I believe, out of Oregon. How does Sean McVay like to use those tight ends to make life easier for his quarterback in the passing game?
Well, one of Sean's first full-time position roles as a coach was coaching tight ends. And so he has a certain flavor, the athletic tight ends that he likes and that he understands how to use. He had Jordan Reed when he was the coordinator and the tight end coach in Washington. Then his first ever pick as the head coach of the Rams was taking Gerald Everett in the second round in the same draft in which they got Cooper Kupp in the third round. So Sean loves those tight ends and will know how to employ those guys. But real quick, I just want to give a shout out to the receiver coach, Eric Yarber. You talk about the development of all these young receivers, and Yarber has been there since Sean has been the head coach, and he had a young Cooper Kupp that he brought along, and now we talk about Puka Nacua and Whittington and all these guys. So shout out to Yarbs and the way he develops these young receivers.
Love it. Love it. Also love, if you go back and look at that staff in Washington, like Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, Sean McVay, they all look like guys who were making assistant coach money. Now that they got that big-time money, they got their new haircuts and their nice clothes and their big watches if you're Mike McDaniel. So that's fun. That's it for us here. We have knocked out the AFC. Now we've knocked out the NFC in terms of burning questions for all 32 teams. That is in the books. We got a busy rest of May and June coming up, Rand. We won't spoil it yet, but shout out to my guy, Rand Carthon. We have some interviews coming up with some pretty fun folks. So that'll be something to look forward to. And in the meantime, I want to thank all you guys for watching and listening to the podcast. And you can subscribe to With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. You can scan that QR code if you're watching us now. If not, go to YouTube/NFL on CBS. In the meantime, hope everybody has a great weekend.